Hello and welcome to Tisky Sour. This is our first episode back in London from Liverpool. Obviously we had a great time doing nightly shows. There was lots to talk about, lots of policy announcements, lots of interesting people about. We considered doing a nightly show for Tory Party Conference, but there just isn't enough happening. It's been going on for 2 days. There don't seem to be any significant policy announcements, and the seats are empty. We're going to talk today about whether we are seeing a crisis in conservatism, and whether the Tory party, the natural party of government, is really on its knees. To discuss that, James Butler, co-founder of Novara Media.
Yes, indeed.
You like artifacts.
It's true. I like dead languages. I like dead parties. So that's why I know a lot about the Tory party.
Perfect. Novara Media's other co-founder, Aaron Bastani.
How you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. Cheers.
Cheers, babe.
Here's to a dead natural party of government. They're now rounding up on people like the Church of England, the City of London. You know, things are probably going from bad to worse for the Conservatives when that happens.
Yeah, just to say, is this the first time that the two of us are on a Tisky Sour together? I think it might be.
Yeah, it's true.
OG.
It's very good, actually. Although, you know, it's not very good gender balance, I must say.
I mean, to be honest, that's why we've never had you on together.
Yeah, that's
before.
fair.
And I think, you know, look, we're an intersectional organisation. You know, BAME, LGBT. James is 6'2", I'm 5'9". You know, we do diversity here. I'm actually 5'10". Okay, I'm quite sensitive about that.
But every now and again we fuck up, like today. But it's still lovely to have you both.
Oh, thank you. I mean, nobody can slag off the Tories like James. James had to come on.
Yeah. Okay, so what has happened at Tory Party Conference on Sunday? We started with Theresa May's interview on Mar. Even Conservative commentators seemed kind of shocked that she hadn't announced anything remotely of interest. So that interview was basically done on Andrew Marr's terms. Fair enough, he was sort of grilling her on Windrush. The one policy announcement that seems to have been made, or there's two, I suppose, from Theresa May. One is about a festival of Brexit, a festival of Britain, which we're going to have in 2022. Quite embarrassingly, one of her past advisors said they were offered that policy a year ago in Downing Street and they rejected it because it was rubbish. But they've obviously brought that back from the dead. The second policy that was announced on Sunday was the idea, sort of populist. I think it was trying to be a populist policy, and it was about the housing crisis, and populist because it was trying to target the problem at people who are foreign, basically. So they're saying there's going to be an excess stamp duty on people who aren't tax domiciled in Britain on buying houses.
I mean, that includes quite a lot of their donor base.
Yeah, but well, I mean, the thing is it's going to be 1 to 3% increase in stamp duty. The proceeds of it are going to go to homeless people. Two problems with this policy, I think. One, what it's supposed to disincentivize, or what the headline policy is supposed to do, is to stop people buying properties in London purely as assets, which is why we have so many empty homes in this city and why prices are out of control. I mean, I think the problem is that if you look at who's buying these houses, Russian oligarchs, Saudi oil barons, they're not going to be chatting with their accountant who, like, they want London properties because it's a safe asset. It's a safe asset with lots of status attached to it. They're not going to say, oh, it's 2% more now, let's do something completely different. This will change nothing. The other embarrassing thing about this policy is that if you're a member of the Tory party, or if you're the leader of the Tory party, you don't want to be drawing attention to homelessness. It has trebled under the Tory party's rule since 2010. It didn't need to, and I don't think this tokenistic policy is going to make the Tory party seem like the ones who really care.
It must be
about
phenomenally
Britain's
visible.
people living in warm houses under roofs.
It must be phenomenally visible in Birmingham in particular. I mean, Birmingham tends to have a lot of rough sleeping anyway. It's a sort of local centre for homelessness. Obviously, people get attracted to urban centres when they're homeless just because there's a greater support network there, and obviously that's where most services are concentrated. It is particularly bad in Birmingham. I mean, I've seen it, in the very brief time that I've been in Birmingham. I'm not a Brummie by nature. It is also worth saying that it's a policy that's easily circumvented as well. I mean, if you're, part of the international capitalist class and you want to buy property in London, you can just set up a series of shell corporations, domicile them somewhere else. You don't need to own it personally. You can own it through any variety of things that are based in places where, and then you buy a subsidiary British company. It's very easy to get around it. I wouldn't worry. It's not something that's going to worry people.
Well, you wouldn't get around, because you'd only get around it if you could state that the person buying the property is registered as a UK taxpayer, which is precisely what they don't want to do.
But then you have someone registered as a director of the company in Britain who buys it on your behalf.
Yeah, but then that person would be like... I think you might be able to charge the 1% to 3%. I just think it's completely irrelevant.
I think
those
you're
people
right.
are still going to buy those properties.
It's again, and I think the point that you're making about the policy base of Tory Conference is completely correct. It's not there, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about just how clearly these are like really pathetic sticking plaster measures for what is, an increasingly crisis-ridden economy.
Aaron,
it raises lots of money, this stamp duty, and I think more stamp duty was raised from 2 boroughs in London last year than the whole of the northeast of England. So it does raise a lot of money. There's some arguments about, does this just basically push the house price further up, right? If you're selling, or the estate agent, you can basically, when, for instance, they were increasing the threshold for stamp duty. Basically, it just meant that houses were sold at a different price. So you can muck about with it, but it does raise money. It'll probably raise like £1 billion or something. And when you're in the situation the Tories are in, with Brexit, with the deficit, with public services, every little helps. I really don't think it's about solving homelessness. I just think it's about helping the exchequer a bit more. But no, there's been nothing. We are looking at a dead party. And this is, I think, what we maybe want to talk about is that, the picture is bigger than just today. The ridiculous pictures, the ridiculous comments, the idiots, the fucking cranks, saying stupid things which are being widely reported on Twitter. And that's just Jeremy Hunt. We're looking at a dead party. And if you look at PASOK in 2009, 40%. Within less than a decade, they went down to 7-8%. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen to the Tories, but if the left plays their cards right, the Conservatives, within a decade, within a couple of elections, can be down and out. And while everybody has been talking about the possibility of a split on the left, as a result of the crises, of course, after the last 2 economic crises, the last 100 years, both times there was a split within the major left party. After 1929, Ramsay MacDonald screws over really the Labour movement. After 1981, you get the emergence of the SDP. That in itself was a response to the crisis of the 1970s. And this time it seems that actually the breakdown of the global order, a major, profound crisis of capitalism, has actually caused a rupture within the Conservative Party. We saw that in 2015 with the rise of Brexit. At first, we didn't really know what that meant. We saw that with the rise of UKIP, rather. We saw that in 2016 with the Brexit vote. We still couldn't really analyse it. Now it looks like we are looking at a real fragmenting of the Conservative movement, the right. And if I was a sort of smart, intelligent young Tory, an MP, they haven't got any, I'd be looking at starting my own party. Because you'd get big institutional backing very quickly, even with just 10, 12 people, because people will look at a small party now with leverage and go, well, they can modify, they can have leverage with this much larger group who are fucking nuts, frankly.
The last, significant, there's something to be said for the fact that Conservatives tend to recognise that splitting parties within a Westminster system of government is generally very bad. I can only think it would be the Corn Laws, the last time you have a really significant split in conservatism. Not ideological split.
Home rule, right?
Fair. There are significant ideological splits within the Conservative movement. Look, and you have sort of the kind of hardcore libertarian Tories, who are the people who provide us with the amusing things at conference. Sajid Javid, who seduced his wife by reading Ayn Rand to her. You know this? That he
No,
read.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I probably did it once and then I purged it from my memory.
Memory for these things. So there's that. You have the kind of social conservatives. You have the kind of nostalgists among Jacob Rees-Mogg. This kind of faux nostalgia for Britain that never was. You have simply the people who wish things to. So people who are split from that, who merely wish for a kind of functioning capitalism. You have the Thatcherites who like a kind of nominally property owning democracy. Whether that translates in practice to how it works is a different matter. So these are these trends are very distinctive within the Conservative Party, but they continue. All of them recognise is that power is good. It's good to have it, and you can't have it on your own. So you have to ally with your compatriots who are a little bit different from you. The other thing to say about May's Festival of Brexit is that it recalls, of course, the Festival of Britain. 1955, I think. They have the festival, around the South Bank. You have this sort of, and so there was a joke at the time that this temporary structure they had for it, the Skylon Tower, which is this big kind of column, has no visible means of support, much like the British economy. This was a joke from 1955, also applicable now.
Did people like it in 1955? Was it a success? Is that why we were repeating it?
It was mixed. Reception was mixed, as I think often gets written out of British kind of public history. What stays in memory is that people really enjoyed it, and there's no question that the Festival of Britain was a success. At the same time, there were massive objections to the amount of spending on something that we were still in the period of post-war reconstruction. There were massive inequalities. So you have there was massive dissent at the time. The contemporary example is something like the Olympics, right? So the Olympics are now remembered, particularly by Twitter's centrist dad faction, as being this amazing time of national unity with this incredible story being told. The Danny Boyle ceremony, etc., etc. And what goes missing is the objections that people had at the time to exactly what it was doing to the area in which the Olympics were being built, the kind of false claims being made, which have now turned out to be false, about what it was going to do for the area, that it would pay for itself in terms of it was going to boost sports participation. All of that stuff didn't materialise, but it gets written out of the kind of celebratory, triumphal history of British public events.
So watching Tory Party conference, there's only been two sort of unifying themes. One is to sound tough on Europe, and one is to sound angry at Labour. Gary, if you could line up Jeremy Hunt's video, which is him being tough on Europe, but while that happens, Aaron, you seemed like you were bursting to say something. No?
Not really. I mean, I quite enjoyed the Olympics, I must admit.
Someone had to.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there obviously was huge political downsides to it. How many people were arrested on the opening evening?
I can't remember, but my partner
that was great for them because they all got loads of compensation.
Yeah, eventually.
I wish I went on that.
I mean, let me tell you, my partner at 6 a.m. the next morning when he'd been booted out of Croydon police station without his keys or his wallet, he was not so happy.
But how much has he got now? 3k?
Yeah, but, took long enough.
I mean, Michael, come on, man. If you're 18 and that's a really traumatic thing to go through.
I was arrested a few times and got police compensation, and it was great.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. But
best day's work
I don't think that's an argument for saying the Olympics ceremony were really good because some people got arrested and they got compensation. I don't think anybody's saying
there was something quite sickening about people being arrested for partaking in a protest, or maybe not a protest. I don't know what the legal thing was. While Shami Chakrabarti was waving the flag for liberty and human rights inside the stadium, that was kind of gross.
I'm trying to remember what I got. I think I got 3k for when it was the G20.
G20
because they kicked us out of a squat unlawfully.
Was that a meltdown?
And then
Chris Knight.
Yeah, exactly. And then I got 1k.
Dark times, comrades.
1k for getting put in a cage in Copenhagen.
So you got compensation out of that?
It's quite lucrative.
Yeah, but that was messy, right, Copenhagen?
Yeah, but I mean, 1k. I wasn't complaining.
Yeah, but people got really fucked up from
Copenhagen.
Copenhagen.
Some people did. No, people got bit by dogs. People got gassed and shit. Yeah. I just got sort of like stuck in a cage for 6 hours.
Grand,
and
fine.
I can sleep anywhere, so it was fine.
But I thought the Olympics were bad. I think the Olympics were bad. But like, this Festival of Britain is going to make the Millennium Dome look like a success story. I think. I mean, it's going to be because it's just the budget, right? The Olympics budget was several billion pounds. This is going to be like 120 million. What the fuck can you do in London for 120 million? Like a half decent football stadium costs twice that. You can't build anything. What are they going to do? So intriguing more than anything else.
We'll have a stall presumably. Can we rent a stall? Novara Media.
Please, let's not.
Maybe we could do live coverage every night. How many days is it going to be?
Well, look, if you go to support.novaramedia.com, you can help us broadcast live from the Festival of Brexit Britain every night in 2021?
2022.
We might also do better things.
I mean, who knows? Hopefully, yeah.
I heard it's going to be a big deal. Right, this is Jeremy Hunt sticking it to the EU.
That 52% of the country aren't rabid populists trying to build Fortress Britain. We fought, as we heard from Gavin just now, we fought for peace on our continent, and none of us are ever going to turn our back on history. But nor, and I want to address our European friends directly now, nor should you turn your back on history either. At the moment, you European friends seem to think the way to keep the club together is to punish a member who leaves. Not just with economic disruption, but even by breaking up the United Kingdom with a border down the Irish Sea. Now, what happened to the confidence and ideals of the European dream? The EU was set up to protect freedom. It was the Soviet Union that stopped people leaving. And the lesson from history is clear. If you turn the EU club into a prison, the desire to get out of it won't diminish, it'll grow, and we won't be the only prisoner that will want to escape.
Oh, you didn't give me any warning. We're back.
Jeremy,
right.
He looks like do you not think that Jeremy Hunt looks like a cheese string in a suit? Fucking cunt.
Oh, Aaron.
Well, that's true. The guy, look, it's an empirical observation. The guy is a cunt.
One of the BBC people said that to him, so we're allowed to.
Yeah.
We're only on the
I
internet.
honestly wouldn't say that about many people. Honestly,
Can we get-
honestly,
in
he's
the
destroyed
doc-
the NHS.
Before we discuss what you said, in the doc there's a tweet that I did today, Gary, but I just want it for the pictures. So the New Statesman commenting on this speech said, and that is exactly what Hunt, who is increasingly spoke of by MPs as the clear favourite and packed out the conference hall in a way that no other minister did today, has done. So this is a story about how the energy in the Conservative Party is with Jeremy Hunt.
High energy.
Next image, how many people were in that hall watching Jeremy Hunt?
Wow.
Not really packed out. I think actually if you zoom it out, it looks even worse. But anyway, you got a lot of empty seats. Fair play to the guy who wrote that, because he was actually telling the truth relative to other Conservative speeches. That was quite a good show.
I think to be fair, Philip Hammond really, I think, beat everybody. I think he got about 250 people in there, which is about half of the Novara Christmas party. So
Since then, it's like when you're a small political organisation and you sort of like, you're worried that not many people are going to turn up, so you book quite a small room, and they just need to book a smaller room. I mean,
they did.
It's quite small anyway, isn't
tiny.
it? Compared to like Labour Party conference, that's quite small. But it's literally 100, 200, 300 people there. But can we get up Brandon Lewis, Gary? This is in the tweet
Swiss Tony
under the one I tweeted. It's in the Spectator article. It's incredible. There's that sort of like
Wow.
There's about
That's just beautiful.
30 people.
It's just
insane.
beautiful.
Wow.
It's just beautiful. Well, I mean, that was going to be Brandon Lewis's big speech about how technology is going to save us all, which was not such a good vibe after having massively compromised all of the delegates' security via their kind of outsourced disaster of a conference app.
What do you make of all the sort of grandstanding against the EU? To be honest, I mean, I think if the Tories had been doing it for longer, it might have been more plausible. I don't think it's the stupidest thing they could do at this point.
What Brandon Lewis would say is he'd say, well, Michael, slagging off the EU is rather like making love to a beautiful woman.
I think this reference is going to be lost on most of our audience.
You know, Swiss Tony. He looks like Swiss Tony from the Fast Show.
Oh my God, that was lost on me.
Really?
So-
You're not that young.
I mean, I know
You
that.
must have watched the Fast show.
I have watched the Fast Show, and I remember that whole making love like a beautiful woman, but I can't remember what this fella looked like.
Swiss Tony. He looks like Swiss
he's
Tony.
up on the screen. Oh, he does look like Swiss Tony, yeah.
He looks like fucking Swiss Tony. Apart from the moustache. If he grew a moustache, he'd look identical to Swiss Tony. Anyway. I don't really know. I don't think most people care.
Dominic Raab did one today as well, really sort of like looking straight into the camera about the EU. If the EU think they can mess us around, they've taken on the wrong people. He's got a real sort of like
Yeah, I mean, this Dominic
macho
Raab.
boy who's just gone through puberty and wants to sort of prove for
Not
himself.
even. And he's just a fucking... He's another fucking cheese string in a suit.
Well, I mean, the thing about Raab is that he emerges from this kind of hard Thatcherite background. Just before he was an MP, he authored a paper for the Centre for Policy Studies that said, we can withdraw from the European Union, slash corporation tax to virtually nothing, abolish minimum wage, et cetera, exploit young people. Workers' rights will disappear entirely, which is why it's great that he's now negotiating it. His stuff today, today he came out with, in the event of no deal Brexit, what we're going to do is we're going to slash corporation tax to 10%, and that will keep the British economy thriving. It's a kind of particularly strange thing for him. But the thing to think about Hunt's attack on the EU, and I think it's worth saying, in the clip we just saw, he looks kind of shifty and uncomfortable, and he's not rhetorically present, he's not delivering a kind of barnstorming, tub thumping either. Tories don't really have those kind of orators, but the reason he's doing it is that he's pitching to that part of the Conservative base who are much more into the kind of EU SSR, frothing beneath the line on the comments section of The Guardian or some other news site, the FT sometimes. These are the people that he's going to need to have vote for him if he stands as a future Tory leader. And he knows that, and that's the pitch that he's making. He doesn't really care. And it's one of the things that has been actually the recurrent theme of this conference, is that you go back and you read the memoirs of people who served with John Major in 1992.
As you do.
I'm a strange person in many ways.
Oh, Michael, we are meant to be political commentators.
Memoirs of people who served with John Major in 1992. That's like a...
Very interesting.
It's very apposite, very relevant.
Yeah, no, I would do. I'd listen to it on audiobook maybe at 1.5 speed.
Read a Wikipedia.
Like
is there a Wikipedia article about that?
Is there a Wikipedia article about any of these people?
There isn't, but it's worth saying, that they all, in retrospect, say basically as soon as they knew that Major was weak, they all had the knives out for each other, and that's the thing that's going on at this conference. Solidarity is an alien word to these people. They don't conceive of themselves as part of a movement. They conceive of themselves as part of an ever-shifting constellation of alliances. They're all out for the most that they can get, and they have no compunction about stabbing each other in the back. This is obviously true after the Brexit vote with Gove and Johnson, and it's going to be increasingly true, and it's obviously the theme of this year's conference. That's why Hunt is doing this. That's why he's pitching himself in this way, because he knows that he needs to carry the kind of frothing colonels in Tunbridge Wells with him in order to win the leadership. He also needs to carry MPs with him first, Tory leadership.
I don't think it's just that. So I think one thing these guys are trying to do when they sort of grandstand and talk about how terrible the EU is and how we don't need them and how we can go for a no deal and we'll still thrive as Britain, is, it's one, to appeal to the Tory party base, because obviously there is a shadow leadership campaign going on. But I also think there's a cabinet agreement that this is now the strategy, which is for the next sort of 2 months to stand up, look really tough and sort of try and stare down the EU. This was like May's speech 2 weeks ago as well, or it's a week ago or something, where she was saying, I've only treated you with respect, etc., etc. After Salzburg, yeah. No, but I think the idea is they are trying to show the public they're acting tough, show the public that a no-deal Brexit would be pretty tough, because, lots of the scare stories, Project Fear. And I think ultimately, within about a couple of months, we'll have signed up to a massive compromise deal.
Look, a no-deal Brexit is not going to happen. There is no way.
I think we're going to stay basically in the single market, basically in the customs union, get a small compromise on migration, and they're going to try and move on.
But the thing is, if you say for a year, we're not going to be prepared, you're going to be prepared. You can't say, we're not prepared for this thing that's like 6 months down the line. We're going to be quite well prepared. We'd be poorly prepared if the whole duration of the negotiations, our government was saying, we're going to have a great deal with the single market. The Europeans were saying the same. Since day one, it's been very clear, we're not going to get a deal which would be accommodating to most Brits, which would basically, I think, be membership of the single market with changes to migration, right? Something's going to have to give. So the idea we're going to be ill prepared is ridiculous because everybody's been talking. I think the thing is, people are pricing it in now to be quite bad. So for it to even meet those expectations, I don't know. I think a lot of people will wake up and they'll be like, oh, I think it's going to be bad. I don't think it's going to be as bad as some people are saying, though.
Sure, I think there is a kind of expectations game being played here, saying like, look, here's the worst it can be, but
exactly,
we're preparing for it. But the problem is with the party, if it's talking up the kind of no deal Brexit stuff, is that what they don't want to do is to allow their headbangers to kind of G up their base to say, well, actually, we can flourish in a WTO rules-led world without an agreement with the EU. We will be global Britain again. We're going to go and buccaneer on the high seas, digital Britain, Empire 2.0, whatever, this kind of shit that they come out with. The problem is they sell that too hard. Then on Brexit Day, the civil war will completely collapse the party, because there's no way that international capital is going to stop kind of clearings between Britain and the rest of the world. That's not going to happen. So there'll be something be extended, or there'll be the most nugatory of agreements, but that's not going to happen. The problem is, it's a Sorcerer's Apprentice moment. If you've unleashed all the frothing hordes of the Tory base talking up a no-deal situation that you can deal with it, and then you row back and compromise in the way that they're going to have to do, God knows what happens to your party.
So that was the one unifying theme of the Tory party conference, which was attacking the EU. The next is attacking the Labour Party. Esther McVey has a wonderful way with words. This is her at Conservative Party conference.
Liverpool's riding high in the Premier League, but after last week's Labour conference, not doing so well in the political league. For in my home city, we witnessed the extraordinary spectacle of a shadow cabinet minister praising the legacy of Derek Hatton and the militant tendency running the city in the 1980s. Yes, you heard it right. A member of the shadow cabinet praising a council that broke the law, fleeced the taxpayer, and brought a proud city to the brink of bankruptcy. And the ringleader is back. Derek Hatton has just been accepted back into the Labour Party after 33 years, inspired to return by Corbyn's far-left socialism, which now makes up Labour Party policy. Momentum is modern-day militant. And remember, there are 3 M's in momentum. Militant, militant, militant. Can you imagine it? This country with Corbyn, MacDonnell and Abbott at the helm. It would be a political nightmare.
I don't get it. I feel like the speechwriter did a bad. Like, what's a political league for a start? I mean, it's not a reference. You can't just say like, well, they're doing well in the football league but bad in the political league. It's not a thing. And also, why? I don't understand that there's 3 M's in momentum. Is there a reference? Is militant, militant, militant? Is saying it 3 times something that happens?
What she's saying is that the entire lifeblood of momentum is the same thing as the militant. That's it. She's saying it's militant, militant, militant.
I mean, Derek Hatton is 70 years old. We don't even know if he's actually joined the Labour Party, and it's become like a central part of Tory Conference.
I mean, it is fascinating. I mean, because the big concern for the Tories, on their fringe events throughout this conference has been, how are we going to appeal to someone who is, not 50, who's under the age of 50, and because that's the tipping point, right? The generation is based 47. And no one under the age of 50 is going to give two I can swear on this, it's Tisky
under
Sour.
50, under 60?
Yeah, 1, they're not going to remember it. 2, they're not going to care. 3, it's baffling, and it's one of the things that the left is losing when it's inward looking, involuted, fighting among itself. God knows we've all done it. This is astonishing. This is the Tory party looking back on its kind of greatest hits period in which this worked 30 years ago, 40 years ago, so let's resurrect it. And not resurrect it in the sense of like do the same like smear that we did 30 or 40 years ago. It's literally resurrect the same characters that we were slagging off 30 or 40 years ago. No one remembers it. No one cares. People barely remember what happened politically 6 months ago. You know, this is the kind of big psephological thing, is that in elections, no one really cares what you've done until 6 months before the election, right? This is the big argument about electoral politics. You know, resurrecting something from 30 or 40 years ago is really bizarre.
It's like if you couldn't get people riled up about the IRA, you're not going to get them riled up about Derek Hatton. I mean, that's real nerdy knowledge, isn't it?
The opening scene of La In, the film, the French film, the film? And it's the protagonist is called Hubert, and he's talking about that. You know, you're seeing a picture of the world, and it says somebody throws himself off a skyscraper, and as they fall, they say, "So far, so good, so far, so good, so far, so good." And then you see a Molotov cocktail come into the picture, and it blows the world up. And he says, "It's not how you fall; it's how you land." And the Tories are falling. I mean, we don't know how they're going to fucking land. This looks really bad.
Yeah.
This doesn't have a future, what we're watching, right? So either there's some big transformational moment for the right after Brexit, and that could get really ugly. I'm not saying it's the end of the right, but this can't sustain, right? The idea that you're going to have somebody like a Ken Clarke and a Sajid Javid and Jacob Rees-Mogg in the same party, I don't think that's going to happen for much longer.
But people say that about the Tory party all the time.
I think they'll stay in the same party.
years.
The issue is whether they'll have any ideas, whether they have any sort of plan as to how they can win over the next generation of
unionist cleavage.
people.
You've got the Scottish Tories are very different. You've got so many different cleavages. I don't know. And like you say, the only thing that keeps them together is power. And if they were kept out of power for a significant amount of time, let's say there was a repeat, let's say Labour won two or three terms, why would they? They don't want to be in the fucking opposition. Right? These people haven't sacrificed all that to be on 60, 70 grand a year. Why would you join the Tories, right? David Cameron joined the Tories because he believed, as somebody who went to Eton, he just deserved to be the fucking Prime Minister. I think he was an old creature. I think he was their last hope in many ways, David Cameron. He wasn't an outstanding politician, but he was decent, he was effective. He wasn't a complete fuck-up, which is what these people are, which is what Ian Duncan Smith and William Hague were before him. So...
yeah, well, I mean, who do they have now? I mean, that's the astonishing thing.
Someone's told me I had missed a reference. So Shawada Patrick says, militant was an expression when Hatton was trying to expose Labour Party collusions decades ago. So the idea of saying it 3 times does have some resonance beyond the fact that there's 3 M's in momentum. Still a pretty strange speech. Someone in the comments was asking, who is Derek Hatton?
Exactly.
He was leader of... But yeah, you've proved our point, so thank you for that. Who he was leader of Liverpool Council in the 1980s when Militant were strong. When Militant were a sort of hard left faction within the Labour Party, and they had control of Liverpool Council. They ran a no cuts budget, so they refused to pass on Margaret Thatcher's cuts. That meant they ultimately ran out of money, and eventually did administrators come in? I'm not sure.
It's a little more complicated than that. It's not worth getting into, but I mean, it's a highly contested question about what would have happened had there not been the moves that were made against Hatton. There's some interesting work done on this. I mean, the stuff that Kinnock came out with in his speech about redundancy notices, Council in fact had a plan to continue to pay all of those workers. It's a complex history. It's not necessarily worth getting into, but effectively he becomes the figurehead for everything wrong with the Labour left. Viewers might have noticed that there was a little scandal around Dawn Butler at Labour conference quoting the militant slogan, which is an entirely correct slogan. It is better to break the law than break the poor. That is completely correct.
Although it's not Labour Party policy. So Labour Party policy was quite officially that we don't do no cuts to budgets.
But this is what the Tories in attacking the militant, like you said, there's no reason to do it in terms of the popular psychology, because the reality is the Tories think it is better to break the poor than to break the law. They do. That's literally their raison d'etre. And Leo Panitchas puts this really, really well. You have to understand who are the Conservatives, right? Before you have universal suffrage, before you have the franchise, before ordinary people believe they can shape their own lives, albeit in a tiny way, who are they? These are the powers that be. These are the establishment. They then have to create electoral parties to represent their interests because society's transitioned to democracy. These organisations weren't set up to change anything or to achieve anything or to help anybody, right? The Labour Party was, arguably the Liberal Party was, the Green Party was. So people have to understand this. There is no reason for the Conservative Party to exist. It's simply there to extend the same interests that, were extended in the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century.
Yeah, it's such a curious alliance of kind of in an emergent capitalist class with the old landed aristocracy. And of course, the great problem of British politics is we never had a successful bourgeois revolution, so we never executed all of these people, and therefore they remain in this kind of continual alliance. It's extremely powerful between land wealth and a kind of nascent bourgeoisie. It means that the structure of British politics is really kind of weirdly deformed as opposed to like kind of a standard European political model.
Simon Bennett says the Tories use the law to break the poor.
That is
quite
true.
a nice way of
That's literally what they
phrase.
do. That's what they do.
Given the whole momentum comparison has come up, I think it's worth rehearsing why militant and momentum have very little to do with one another. So whatever you think of what militant did when they managed to get control in Liverpool or influence the council in Liverpool, the difference between momentum and militant is militant were a small organisation. They were genuinely entryist because they were a small organisation trying to take over a large organisation by sort of, as Michael Crick writes in that book, sort of like by trying to make meetings boring, because that if you attend, then you can get an amount of control within that organisation that's disproportionate to your numbers. They were a small organisation of highly disciplined people. Momentum, on the other hand, is a ginormous organisation of people who aren't very disciplined. So that the whole point of what Momentum have been fighting for over the last 3 years is not to make the Labour Party a more boring, more closed place so that a small minority of people are able to take over a larger organisation. What they've been fighting for 3 years is to allow this organisation to properly represent the vast majority of people at its base who want the Labour Party to have politics along the left-wing lines of John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott. So, I mean, the analogy doesn't work. And I think it is important to say that because that's also something that people on the Labour right say, which is sort of like Momentum are trying to control everything just like Militant did. What Momentum have been arguing for is the most transparent, most popular form of democracy because it's when stitch-ups happen, that's against us, not in our favour. Aaron.
Also, you've seen it, we're probably going to show it in a bit, like the video of that guy going, he's like, what's he saying, bollocks to Brexit? Or no, chuck checkers. Yeah. And then he's handing out these badges and somebody pushes over and the badges go everywhere. Have we got that?
Yeah, so let's, we've done the speeches from the leadership. Obviously, another important part of a conference is the party activists, the people at the grassroots, the people who make it happen. Actually, is that video in the script?
Have you not got it? I
don't believe it
It
is.
definitely is, but I didn't label it properly.
Okay, well, basically my point is if it comes up, I'm sure people watching have seen it. If this had happened at Labour Party conference, if a Momentum member was handing out badges for something and then a Progress member, or vice versa, had pushed them over like that, it would have been front page news, violence, aggression, intimidation. Actually, turns out Labour Party conference was quite well-natured. People disagree. You get on. I have people. I know people on the Labour right. They're nice people. You talk to them. Whatever. You try and persuade them. Some of the melts you just sort of ignore. You laugh at. Fine. You don't go around pushing people and intimidating people like that. Unless you have very good reason to. Like, for instance, they might be compromising the safety of somebody there, which this guy wasn't doing. He was just handing out badges. So yeah, just really the flagrant double standard at the heart of our political media in this country. Unbelievable.
I'm going to try. Oh, it was in there. We should show it, Gary. Can you see it?
Ready.
Yeah? Brilliant. Can we get that up?
Chuck Checkers badge? Chuck Checkers badge? Any of you would like a Chuck Checkers? Oh, hey now. That's terrible. That's an assault, Barry's.
One, it's not an assault, but
actually it isn't.
Probably
is it an assault to kick badges out of someone's hand?
Assault doesn't have to have any physical contact whatsoever.
You can be shouting in somebody's face.
Really? And that's assault?
Spitting on somebody.
That's why physical violence is assault and battery.
She was probably a fully grown woman as well that knocked the badges out of the hands of the teenager.
I mean,
they're supposed to be desperate for young members. Then, there's 4 of them that are there, and one of them's had the badges knocked out of his hands.
All of their activist base are nutcases.
They're really violent, angry, bad people. No, they are. And they paint the left as, look, people had fun, we had a party, we're drinking, we're talking about politics. Like, they're fucked up people, a lot of these people. They're like, really angry, bad people.
So that was one young Tory activist who had a bad time at Tory Conference, but potentially he's going to remember that for a while.
He's going to be scarred.
We've got another example
Who cares?
of Tory young people, what they care about. They've been speaking to Dawn Foster. I think we can probably get this tweet up. So Dawn Foster was doing some anthropological research. She's at the Tory party.
Ethnographic.
Well, I suppose, yeah, okay. I mean, ethnographic research, yeah.
Anthropological.
Well, anthropological
It's not
research.
different society, is it?
Well, but they're this. Well, ethnographic is the method you use when you're doing anthropology.
I mean, I would say that they are a different society, and I think it's very important to remember that.
Michael definitely meant ethnographic, whatever.
They're the same thing. Right.
She was participant observer
She
with
asked
all these
them,
fucking cranks.
she
basically,
asked
is what
them
you're
young
saying.
Tories what policies they would attract voters under 30 to the party. And they replied, bring back public hanging and scramble for Africa 2.0.
I mean, this is actually, it's funny because obviously young Tories you have to be a kind of a special breed of young person to be a young Tory. You have to be actively quite an unpleasant person, frankly. But those two things, imperialism and a sadistic pleasure in watching the public death of others, I mean, what kind of psychology that speaks to? I mean, it's worth thinking about these things as being representative of, a basic psychological disposition within the ruling class in Britain, which I think there really is, and it's not limited to them. It's increasingly part of the tenor of British social life. There has been a welter of television programs which are all about, finding some, enjoying the pain of, a particular subgroup of people, whether they're benefits claimants or fat people.
But you not just think that's because these people, that's because the producers and the people that are coming up with this and the TV execs are probably just public school educated.
They have an enormous audience.
Do you think
they have an enormous audience?
No, but the idea is
There is
percolated
something about-
a lot
I don't
across.
think-
I don't know where. No, that's clearly correct. I just wonder to what extent is it actually just the same bastards.
Oh no, absolutely.
That would commission that.
Yeah,
I think ordinary people wouldn't commission that sort of stuff.
Well,
generally,
I'd
hope.
I don't speculate about ordinary people.
Okay, non-fucked up people.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I don't know. But what I do know is that there's an audience for this kind of stuff that infects British political culture. That the Tories, in fact, remember that they made a great big deal about punishing, parasites and scroungers and that.
It'd
and
be
not
interesting to
that
see
kind of
if the amount
sadistic
of that programming and the ratings for that kind of programming has gone down recently. Because
Channel 4's not that popular, right?
Well, what those annual what's it called, the annual social attitude surveys?
British.
What that's been showing is that sort of like when the Tories first came to power, people started becoming a lot less sympathetic towards the unemployed, the disabled, single mothers, etc., because of that campaign that George Osborne mounted at that point. But then what you tend to get after sort of 3-4 years of a Tory government is people start to feel sympathy again. So they see sort of like the effects that this kind of politics has. They see homeless people on the street, and sort of sympathy returns to the British public. So I think when that sort of poverty porn was really big was in those first years of that austerity government, and I feel like it has subsided.
I think
somewhat.
there's a wider social trend to do with humiliation as a kind of public spectacle. It's not,
but we used to have like public hangings and shit.
No,
I mean,
but
that's not new.
But this is my point: is that there is
You're doing that Stephen Pinker argument. It's like, James, I mean, if you look at historically, we've done much more brutal things.
The public spectacle used to be torture and execution. That used to be the public spectacle.
And this is my point: is that you have a relatively civilized caesura in which that's no longer the case. It's not, look. The state has murdered people until very, very recently. To imagine there isn't an appetite for it is obviously foolish. And it's only, relatively recently, only really with the emergence of a mass public, that you get a move away from these kind of things as there being a kind of humiliating basis for social pleasure. And to me, it's a very brief social democratic caesura in which that isn't an acceptable feature of public life. I think it's returning, and I think it's far more widespread and not electorally tied to conservatism.
Oh no, I agree with that. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the demise of Osama bin Laden, right?
Yeah.
When he was killed, and people in Times Square going, USA! Or Gaddafi being fucking sodomized with a pistol.
Yeah.
And like Hillary Clinton basically laughing about it.
Yeah.
Like that, politicians in the 1950s and 1960s, that's just not plausible.
Yeah.
It's just not plausible, right? Both sides of the Atlantic. I agree with you, but what I want to say about the what class of people become TV exec producers, and I'm not blaming them. Right, I agree with you. It's a broader sort of disposition, which clearly has diffused culturally quite significantly over the last 10 years, particularly since the financial crisis. But if you look, for instance, what's his name? The political editor at The Sun.
Harry Cole?
No. His boss.
Tom Newton-Dunn?
Tom Newton-Dunn. Eton. Cunt.
Yeah.
Yeah? But he went to Eton.
Yeah,
and this
yeah,
is the
yeah.
person. He'll have the temerity to say, well, I know what working class Sun readers want to read about politics. Fuck off. You went to Eton, you fucking prick. Stig Abel, former editor of The Sun. Same story.
Managing editor of The Sun.
Oh, sorry, he wasn't really the editor because
Oh, he's-
he was the editor because they hacked a dead schoolgirl's phone, so they didn't have an editor for a little while. But my point is, it's the same. It's that milieu of people.
I agree.
It's not,
I agree
it's not,
entirely.
it's not
I agree.
coincidental. They come from very privileged backgrounds and believe they can treat working class people like this, and that it can be a spectacle of succor for the average person. Now, that's not to say you aren't right, but I'm intrigued to know really if we could do some sort of demographic study of the people that commission these kinds of programs. I think they would be overwhelmingly quite affluent, white
Yeah,
men. I don't mean to be so uber woke here, but that'd be my presumption.
So there's another bit of useful information in the comments. So Nino T says, hi guys, most benefit shows and similar came on Channel 5 and its sister channels. They were also on Channel 4, but you're right, Channel 5 was the real vanguard in this genre. These were owned at the time by Richard Desmond, who owned The Star and
pornographer
Express.
in chief. Yeah.
Oh, was he a pornographer?
Yes. Yeah. It was his background. It's his initial industrial background. There was a big scandal about his proximity to government because he was a pornographer.
On his Wikipedia page is him hanging out with George Osborne. It's all starting to make sense, guys. I think we should start to take some questions. So start putting your questions in there. While you're doing that, of course, Novara Media's subsraiser is still going on. It's going quite well. Again, thank you for everyone who has become a monthly subscriber to Novara Media. You are who makes this possible. But we want to keep growing. We want to keep expanding. And we can only do that with more subscribers. So if you haven't already, please go to support.novaramedia.com. And the ask we're making is for everyone to subscribe for the equivalent of 1 hour's work a month, so that we can work around the clock. Of course,
A lot of people are saying that James is great tonight, by the way.
Good.
A lot, and I just want to say,
Yeah.
James can do more stuff.
James is great.
Thank you, comrades.
James can do more stuff if we get more subscribers.
Exactly, yeah. So one of our original ask is, as you know, most of the work that goes into Novara Media is voluntary, so we want to be able to start to offer ourselves and everyone who's working here, everyone behind the scenes, a living wage for what they do. Beyond that, what we want to do is start having shows nightly. So, I mean, obviously, we won't go straight to nightly. We'll go to 2 days a week, 3 days a week, etc. But the more income we have, the more people we can employ to make this happen, and then ultimately you can have what's an alliteration for butler? We'll think about it anyway.
So, for instance, we're going to have the Bastani factor, TBF. Just that's a serendipitous sort of, we didn't even think about that, and then we're like, oh wow, that works.
We've already got the Bastani factor and Ash Wednesdays.
It'll be what the butler saw or something like that, won't it?
What the butler? That sounds ridiculous.
Butler.
It's the famous mystery detective novel thing.
Butler's Dawn. It's kind of
Butler's Dawn.
Dawn Butler isn't really famous enough. Doesn't really work. But Dawn, I'm thinking Red Dawn. Anyway.
This is.
Oh, is she? Are we giving Dawn Butler a show?
No, we're not giving Dawn. Just to be clear,
I'd give her a show.
That's just great. Just to be clear, we're not giving Dawn Butler a show. But yes, go to support.novaramedia.com. Help us build a new media from politics. Regular shows. We want to do more viral videos, don't we? Stuff like a 3-day weekend. Very important. Look at
TUC policy. By the time we're all dead.
by the time
within a century, I think it's possible.
By the
for us
time
to
the
work 4
seas
days
have
a week.
boiled and we are killed by the sun becoming a red giant, and the moon will.
Yeah, by the time all life on the planet has ceased, we will no longer be working a 5-day week.
Venus will be habitable as a result of terraforming. At which point, when we move to Venus, we can have a 4-day week.
All right, some questions. We haven't spoken about this, so I'm not sure if you have. Ollie Mason, any comment on the media reform study that talks about the bad coverage of the anti-Semitism scandal? Has anyone seen that?
I looked
at it very briefly.
But I haven't seen it in depth.
Yeah, we all need to read it properly. But I mean, from what I've seen, it confirms what everyone suspects, which is that this has been reported horrendously. So I think from what I read, the idea was that they've looked at what voices were platformed when discussing especially IRA, so the IHRA definitions, and they found that very rarely was there anyone who was defending the Labour Party's position at that point in time. And they also looked at the questioning that was undertaken by especially the BBC and The Guardian. So one thing that was interesting is that these were the two outlets that were identified as being particularly erroneous or particularly notable in the frequency of them sort of like covering this row in a way that was very far from objective. But yeah, we'll look at that more properly. I mean, it could be good to get someone on who's part of writing that. The media analyses of sort of how the media has treated Corbyn have been pretty interesting up to now. 2 years ago, there was the LSE one that was showing how the treatment of Corbyn by the media was overwhelmingly biased in his disfavour.
Just interestingly, just to throw it out there, on the IHRA definition, I don't know if you've seen this story that came out yesterday, I think, maybe a couple of days ago, that the faction within the Board of Deputies are pushing a no-confidence motion against one of its vice presidents for criticising the nation-state law.
Yeah.
Also, this is completely unreported in the media. Nobody's talking about it except for nursing papers and magazines. The Royal College of Nurses are no-confidencing senior people as well, because they got sold out on an industrial dispute. Mm-hmm. That's good. It's good to know confidence people. It's only when it's the Labour Party that fucking like the right-wing media melts down and attacks them. Yeah. If you don't feel represented, it's
an exercise of democratic power. It's
yeah. And anyway. Also it's transparent because in the case of, for instance, with the Board of Deputies, it's people. Okay, now we can have an honest discussion about what you really think about this very racist law. Okay, that's good.
This is a good question from Mike. Question: how do we heal the urban-country divide concerning race? There are huge differences to how migrants, immigrants, whatever, basically people who aren't white British in the country. What do we do? So I suppose the idea is that people that live in cities and people who live outside of cities think very differently about people of different races or ethnic origin or national origin. How do we heal those divides?
I've got thoughts on that, but I mean, James,
I'll go for you, Aaron.
So if you look at the language, the sort of etymology of these words, città, city, civiltà, civilization, the two go hand in hand, they're coterminous. Civilization is coterminous actually just with the rise of urban life, really about 10,000 years ago, obviously, paradoxically, dialectically, with the emergence of agriculture. Large concentrations of urban dwellers are contingent on mass farming. Anyway, as somebody who's sort of mixed race and from a town, Bournemouth, that's true, but these places have changed far more than people think. And if you go to Bournemouth, it has a huge concentration of immigrants now. If you go to... And yes, the political sort of overhead of that has been the rise of the BNP in some of the new towns, in places which are overwhelmingly dependent upon cheap immigrant labour. But the complexion of them has changed. They've stuck around. They've had kids. And I would submit that actually there's going to be a wave of progressive values diffusing and percolating into these areas as well. It may take another 10, 20 years... But on things like gay rights, on gender rights, on race stuff, yes, it's lagging behind, but I wouldn't put them at odds with one another. I just think there's a sort of a brief interruption. I mean, I'll give you an example. In Bournemouth, you will now just about see men holding hands, okay? 20, 30 years behind London, fine.
Disgusting public display of affection.
But you will never see women holding hands, which in London is very rare. I've only actually ever seen that in London. But that's not to say that it's the opposite. It's just that people aren't necessarily accustomed to seeing it. So overcoming it, I mean, you have to have national political movements. You need institutions which sort of persuade and debate and talk about these things, which I think the Labour Party writ large is very good at doing if we can democratise it. But yeah, I wouldn't be pessimistic. At the same time, I wouldn't be naive and say, well, once we become a majority country, by the midpoint of the 21st century, we'll have no racists anymore.
Yeah, people have made those demographic arguments for decades.
I think that's true.
Really turn out. Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. I mean, the other thing is, what exact division are we talking about here? Because city versus countryside and major urban centre versus kind of, lower tier towns. I don't like to use that kind of hierarchical sense, but those kind of smaller towns is often the way that people talk about these things, right? Because the countryside thing is actually a little bit different. Yes, lots of areas of the countryside are kind of deeply socially conservative. Lots of areas of the countryside are also very, very weird. Like, often far stranger than cities. It's one of the things that, people who live in villages will tell you that, that it's a very different kind of community. And so this question, I think, actually often centers around kind of relationships between different kinds of cities. So you talk about Bournemouth. Bournemouth isn't countryside.
No, it's major urban area, actually, yeah.
And
it just doesn't have a cathedral.
Yeah. So actually thinking about, those differences and the reason those towns differ from major urban centres, and then again about how those two centres differ from kind of villages and countryside proper, I think that those distinctions are worth drawing. Do I have a strategy for making racism go away in all of them? No, I don't. But I do think that the challenges are different. So one of the things that emerges in kind of often deindustrialised centres, often and I'm not just talking about the north here. I mean, when you talk about Bournemouth, but you can talk about a lot of other small towns on the south coast, they're experiencing some degree of kind of regeneration now.
Yeah.
But historically, they've been places where, ultimately there's very little opportunity. They tend to be very difficult to move out of because the costs to move from a city, or a town like that to somewhere else are actually quite substantial, particularly if you want to remain within the south. And so, so that question about towns, I think, is a major one for any kind of left-wing
Can I reply
project.
quickly? I mean, Brighton is one of the most progressive places in the UK. I think it's often over-egged, but it obviously is. But it's a town. And then you've got places like Durham or Middlesbrough, Belfast, which are cities, but they have quite... So I agree with you. It's very... I think in this country we have huge regional inequality, and that's fed into, I actually think, a real... xenophobia, and so I'm not saying all Northerners are racist because there was loads of Brexit voters in the southeast and the southwest, but clearly there's large swathes of Britain who have been economically disadvantaged by our model, which favours the City of London, favours the financial interest even over an industrial capital, and that has fed in, I think, to a bunch of social mores elsewhere. So James is absolutely right, but we have to be attentive. It's more of a regional inequality thing, I think, rather than city versus country.
This is the point that Tom Hazeltine makes, right, in that Revolt of the Rust Belt piece in the New Left Review, where he looks at just kind of the result of Thatcherite and then Blairite economic policies and traces them very, very clearly to Brexit voting. Now, look, I'm not saying that's the only factor in a Brexit vote. It obviously wasn't the only factor, but the data there looks pretty convincing.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some comments and then I've got another question. So comments. A good suggestion for James's show title, James and the Giant Speech. That's been seconded in the comments as well. Someone's backing me up against you, Aaron. Anthropology doesn't have to be a different society. This is from someone who did his PhD in anthropology in a hospital in Manchester.
And what was your research? And what was your method of data collection? It was ethnographic.
Yeah,
Good night.
That's right. Okay. Blue Raymond said there was a Pride event on the Isle of Lewis this Saturday. Sounds lovely. And Dorhe Bolskin, I hope that's how you pronounce it, says, I hope there is going to be a Shon This Way weekly. If she wants to do that, it would be so good. I 100% agree with you. Dorje.
Is that Dorje Boleskin?
Yeah.
Interesting. Dorje is the thunderbolt in Vajrayana Tantra and Buddhism, so the energy, the kind of electric energy, and then Boleskin is the place where the early 20th century occultist and Satanist Aleister Crowley did his magical retirement in Scotland, later owned by, I believe, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, and recently burnt down near Loch Ness.
Wow, that was really impressive.
James and the Giant Preach. Is what
James the Giant Preach.
For your
That's
show.
funny.
That'd be good.
Okay, question for you both. Oliver Kant, do you think the Tories will have to start sounding like US Republicans to attract new people. I think
Super
we
interesting.
talked a lot about this last year about them trying to start a culture war. Have they given up?
No, they haven't. Sam Gyimah, who's their universities minister, has been going on about it, right? So and it's obviously the easy place to do it is kind of campus, where you have kind of the most kind of outre examples of sort of weird transmutations of left politics and sort of radical liberalism, stuff like that. Not sort of kind of conflict about freedom of speech, etc., etc. Doesn't really seem to have been taking hold. The other way that this is happening, I think, is with Liz Truss. So Liz Truss, and I think we actually have an image of Liz Truss's like weird attempt to make a tweet. I'm sure it will come up at some point, where she attempts to make a sort of, she's seen how viral things work.
Yeah.
And she knows that there are hashtags.
That's not like the Republicans, though. She's saying this is the generation that loves Airbnb, Ubering, Deliverooing.
No. But look,
and they love capitalism.
She also, right. So she wants there to be a significant ideological cultural war over capitalism. That's what she wants. That's what she believes. She's been criticising the Prime Minister for being too Milibandite.
But that's not what the Republicans want. So the Republicans don't want to have a war about capitalism. They want to have a war about race.
Yeah. No. But you can't.
Slightly.
But that doesn't mean that you can't have other forms of culture war here in the UK, and that's what Liz Truss wants. She wants a classic culture war between socialism and capitalism. That's what she wants. She wants that to map onto social conflict. That's the way that she wants things to.
That's a class war, though, isn't it? That's not a culture war.
She would perceive it as a culture war.
Also, the composition of class in this country is very different to the US. So we always talk about the Nan Anderson thing. Class is culture.
There is that. But look, maybe the interesting tracking thing here is the difference in Philip Hammond's speech this year and last year. Right, last year, he saw the conflict as being, this kind of, evoke Cuba and Venezuela and so on and so on and so on. Didn't happen this year. Has realised that this kind of conflict is not going to work. Doesn't look like the culture war stuff, the classic culture war stuff, right, over which would be about, kind of ethnic divisions, doesn't really work for them. Although, to be honest, I think it will be their go-to strategy probably in about 6 months' time, when nothing else pans out for them.
They've already picked up all those UKIP voters anyway, right? They picked up about 60% of UKIP voters in the last general election. We forget, they did get... The Tories got a lot of votes in the last general election, right? They got the most votes they've got since, 1992 or 87. But basically, Theresa May got a hell of a lot of votes, not because she was good or because she was popular or because she ran a good campaign, but because they absorbed a lot of these racist UKIP votes. A surprisingly high number actually still went to Labour. But there's just not that many votes left in that. I know what you mean. It's a sort of default for them, but it's not going to get them many votes, right? Really?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a vote winner. I think it's the kind of strategy that they do when they're in desperation. Remember that when the Tory party has been at its most explicit about this stuff has been when they've been in opposition. So, and really like floundering in opposition. Think of the electoral campaign under Michael Howard. Are you thinking what we're thinking? That kind of nudge, wink, wink. I'm a racist. Are you a racist too? Come and vote for me.
That was Linton Crosby's first foray into British politics.
So that stuff is the stuff they go to when they're desperate. It may well be that the kind of revivification of the movement around Tommy Robinson will lead them to kind of see that as something that's quite vital, that's kind of active in a way that clearly Tory Conference isn't. So they might go, look, that's where the energy is, so maybe kind of incline again that way. And that gives them, and that's transformable in various ways. It can be along the lines of kind of ethnic hatred, but also the other thing that that has been very powerful for Tommy Robinson has been to claim free speech, and that's something that that faction of Tories like to do. They like free speech. Someone like Sam Gyimah will go on about free speech in universities. Liz Truss will go on about it, and it will be part of their full-throated defence of capitalism.
Yeah.
Another comment I like, Daniel Salt. In countryside, people are more progressive than popular culture portrays. Not all wax coats and wankers. Labour members from surrounding countryside flooded Brighton to help deliver general election result. Another question, what is a tankie? So tankies are people who supported the Soviet Union up to the end, and they're called tankies because they supported the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia or Hungary.
Hungary.
So they supported the tanks
56.
going into Hungary in 1956.
which is the event that turned Eric Pickles from a young communist into... well, no, that was 68, wasn't it?
Must have been, right. Hobsbawm left the Communist Party over 56.
Yeah.
It was a big moment in the...
68 is the Prague Spring, by the way. That's the event I'm referring to.
Yeah, 56 was a big thing, for the British New Left, people like E.P. Thompson and so on, because they were like, oh, wow, this Moscow-based project's kind of fucked up.
But not everyone went to the far right of the Tory party like Eric Pickles.
No, it's a really interesting transformation.
Interesting or...
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is a guy who was kind of an avowed communist as a young man, and then, you know, makes the swing, not to say a kind of anti-Stalinist leftism, which might be a possible thing, but takes the kind of pendulum swing all the way into kind of Tory land. I mean, that's an odd transformation.
Can I also say, though, about the free speech stuff?
I mean, it happens with neocons as well, I guess, from kind of Trotskyism. But anyway.
Yeah. With the free speech stuff, I think the left does have to start really robustly defending this a bit more.
Yes.
And I think we're all of a mind on this. Because if we're going to sort of try and map British politics and the success of Labour and the demise of the Tories onto the US, and you say, well, look, the Republicans are doing well, maybe they can just copy it over here. Well, no, because Labour haven't adopted the line which the Democrats have, which is effectively progressive neoliberalism. Now, imagine if Labour had Owen Smith as the leader, saying they would campaign a second referendum. That was basically the analogue to the Hillary Clinton campaign. So it's not that simple. They left so much space there, it's difficult to say, well, if you did sort of transpose that offer onto British politics, would it then mean the Tories win a majority? Probably not, because Labour now have such a broad cultural reach as a party that isn't just trying to serve the interests of the metropolitan elite or graduates or BAME people, which was the Obama coalition. They're also really, look at that party political broadcast about left behind towns. Very fucking true. These people are left behind, and regeneration for Barnsley or for Merthyr Tydfil shouldn't be limited to a train and getting the fuck out of there as quickly as possible. We need to build infrastructure, jobs, public services there as well.
Should probably tell that to the Labour Party in Wales.
We should. But that's not the Democrat Party's agenda for sure, right? So...
that Labour Party video from Our Town has had 1 million views on Twitter, presumably. I don't know how many it's had on Facebook, actually. But it also went out on national TV because it was a party political broadcast. And it has the Tory parties terrified because what they hoped to be their electoral strategy was that they could dismiss the Labour Party as a bunch of metropolitan liberals and they would appeal to what they call white working class Britain. And now they can see that the Labour Party aren't going down that Hillary Clinton strategy, and that leaves them not really knowing what to do, which leads into what I'm going to call the final question, I think, from Alexander Platz. If the Tories do anti-globalist economics with ethno-nationalist immigration, fund the NHS but cut welfare...
Sorry, repeat that. Sorry, this is a beer in. It's
right, okay. This is from Alexander Platz. If the Tories do anti-globalist economics, so economic nationalism, with
Bannonism.
With Bannonism, with ethno-nationalist immigration, fund the NHS but cut welfare with a pound shop Green New Deal, could they win the next general election?
Anti-globalist, that could mean a range of things.
Well, I mean, you are looking at Bannonism, right? So it's sort of like economic nationalism with a sort of ethno-nationalist, racist sort of politics behind it that funds public services, but still demonises people on welfare.
Well, Bannonism is plausible because the US dollar is still the default reserve currency for world trade. The pound isn't. So I think that's a moot question. Not many countries can do Bannonism, China and the US.
But no, I mean, I think the question is a good one because there is a vision of economic autarky, right? With a sort of punitive element to the state, while also funding care for the deserving, right? So you fund the NHS, but also you cut back social spending except for those who are agreed by social default to be deserving of it. So, eliminate global aid spending, eliminate funding presumably for, people with HIV, et cetera, that kind of stuff. You really cut back on anyone who has, lifestyle sickness. You appeal. So this is essentially, so there was the research, and in fact I was referring to it to the two of you before we went on air, the research that came out of YouGov this year, which effectively said there is space for a political offer in Britain, which is hang nonces, fund the NHS.
I'm down with that.
The whole thing of
that sounds good.
The whole thing of we shouldn't pay for the NHS for fat people or
Yeah,
people who
yeah,
smoke.
yeah.
That's something that the right-wing press and especially talk radio has tried to ramp up for ever and ever and ever. Like, there's a real campaign.
We're talking about
The
different things.
Sun does
the
it every
issue.
so often.
Yeah, but I don't think it's got that
It
much
doesn't
traction
have
actually
that
when it
much
comes to
traction,
elections.
We're talking about different things, like saying that like you could have very firm law and order and be quite regressive, and still have a universal welfare system. I mean, that's what this country had in the 1950s under both the Tories and the Labour Party. So I think, you know, again, when we're sort of trying to describe what a successful Conservative project might look like, I think we shouldn't be too expansive and say, well, somebody who would be racist would also be saying, you know, hang the nonsense. I mean, nobody's saying
it's worth you expanding. Actually,
nobody's pro-paedophile.
It was an
Which
interest.
is how the far right try and paint us.
Yeah. The point I want you to expand on, because I thought it was interesting, is the idea that the economic nationalism of Bannon can only work for China or the US. Well, why do you see that to be the case?
Well, first of all, until we start producing all our energy from renewables, we'll be a net importer of energy. So, okay, good luck. We have a population of 65 million people. Overwhelmingly, the foodstuffs they eat can't be produced in this country for now, the technologies we have. Good luck. In the US, you can. You really can. In China, you can. In Russia, you kind of can. Lots of energy. 16 million square kilometres, 150 million people. You know, it's not comparable. So, no, Britain can't have economic autarky. It can in some sectors, and it should actually strive for that as we try and, you know, move, for instance, to energy independence. We should be able to try and do that, just from a climate change resilience point of view. But Belgium can't be an autarky, right? Belgium, 15, 20 million people, tiny surface area, no natural resources. So, yeah, the idea that import substitutionism or replacing imports for domestically produced goods and services is possible in each country isn't correct. Even Mussolini, when the fascists were in charge of Italy, said we need to move from pasta to polenta and risotto because they could be grown domestically, and so they didn't want to import crops like wheat. They couldn't produce enough wheat for the pasta consumption of the average Italian. So, you know, this takes on a range of hues, and we can talk about economic nationalism, but what the US is capable of, what China is capable of, is very different to what Britain is capable of.
The second part of the question, though, which I think is important, or the other implied part of the question, is could the Tories do it? Could they adopt that ideology? And the answer is no. Because there is too substantial a part of British capital that is already immensely pissed off. Remember, this is the party of business that has had Boris Johnson say "fuck business." I mean, we're already in a very strange situation. So to then adopt a program which essentially vitiates the international hub of finance capital, but also kind of really attacks those kind of massive global corporations that are based here in London, is just not going to work. They're not going to do it. It's just not possible for them to adopt that series, unless, you know, so they wouldn't be able to do it for the next election. If they were to be wiped out as a party in Westminster, then that would be possible. But you know, I mean, if they get wiped out, then you're looking at a post-97 situation. They're not going to be back within the term of a single parliament.
Aaron, you want?
I was going to respond to something, but I forgot.
You know what? Whilst you're remembering, I think we should
lucidity
draw to a close, which means that you've got your final points.
Okay.
So
I've got it back now.
You've got it back.
Yeah.
Which means you're going to start. Aaron, your final points.
Oh, no, I want to pick up basically on this. James is absolutely right. The dependence Britain has on the financial service industries, the extent to which our establishment is ensconced with it. You know, when I say ensconced within it, I mean, you know, the sort of, these people that live in St John's Wood and Mayfair and Chelsea and Kensington, what do you think their kids do? They work for the Goldman Sachses, they work for JP Morgan, they work for the wealth management funds, they're brokers, they're hedge fund managers. That's what they do, because Britain's economy is now so oriented around finance capitalism. They want to make astronomical amounts of money. That's the only place you can really do it, unless you're a sports star or an actress or an actor or a musician, right? So they really don't want to break with that. And when you think of a company, we were talking about this before we came on air, BHP Billiton, isn't it? The mining company. 3% of their revenues are in pound sterling. So if you move to import substitutionism, they're going to fuck off, right? And this has happened before. So if you read people like Giovanni Arrighi, there are these phases within the world system, and a nation state, or in the case of Genoa, a city state, becomes hegemonic. It has a sort of period of almost political decadence and downfall when it goes through a process of financialization. Returns increasingly come through financial instruments. You see this with Genoa, with the Dutch Republic, with Britain, and then with the United States. And I think, that's kind of what's going on. And it's happening in the US as well, right? To a lesser extent. So the big question is, to what extent could the United States break with the World Economic Order? Because there are these hugely financialized firms so vastly benefiting from the world order. Would they want to stay in the US? And actually, this is something I just remembered. You're seeing it a bit with Iran. So you've had the US saying, fuck Iran. Sanctions on Iran. The Europeans, the Brits, the Russians, the Chinese are saying, we kind of quite like the gas and the petroleum. And they're not actually that bad, right?
French in particular.
The French in particular, yeah. And the Italian. I mean, the Italians need to import energy. It's not that far away. So, you're beginning to see breakdowns in the world order. So the question is, is Bannonism, rather, is that even, plausible in America? We don't know. I mean, I think material it is, in a way that it isn't in Britain. But, finance is a thing. And breaking with it is a revolutionary act. It's very hard to imagine it coming from the right in the 21st century in the same way that it did in the 20th.
James?
You want me to conclude? You want me to wrap up? Okay, I think there's one really interesting thing there, and Aaron mentions Giovanni Arrighi, and just to say, the postscript to, I think, the second edition of the Long 20th Century, he says, look, we're entering a time in which this kind of global hegemony is shifting, and one of the most interesting things that might happen is you actually get a divergence for the first time between economic and military hegemony. So it might well be that you have a bifurcating financial and military system, which we've never experienced globally before. He says we also might be entering a time of kind of just total chaos. So that's thrilling. Anyway, to say, let's just return to the kind of spectacle, the empty and vapid spectacle that we've had over the last few days. We're only going to increase. So tomorrow evening we have Boris Johnson's much trailed rally in favour of Brexit, which is of course a spoiler for May's forthcoming speech on Wednesday. So that's going to be really interesting to watch over the next couple of days. I want to end on Boris Johnson, right? Boris Johnson has been in the headlines today for trolling Theresa May by standing in a field of wheat. Boris Johnson is the man who began his career in public life as someone who conspired with his friend Darius Guppy to break the legs of an obstreperous journalist, a journalist attempting to uncover some misdoings. Boris Johnson is a fundamentally unserious person. We had the Labour Party conference in which there was a genuine outburst of ideas, of energy, of visions for transformation, of real kind of agenda-setting stuff, really astonishing. They have Boris Johnson standing in a field of wheat. And the thing to remember about Boris Johnson is that he's not a jester, he's not light relief. Boris Johnson and what he represents in government is a cancer in public life. That's what I have to say.
A lovely conclusion to the show. There might not be any ideas bashing about in Birmingham. Well, there probably are in the whole city of Birmingham, but not in the Tory Party conference part of it. But there definitely were tonight in the Novara Media studios. Thank you very much for joining me, James Butler.
It's been a great pleasure.
Aaron Bastani, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure. Never a chore.
My pleasure. I think James, after tonight, the audience have spoken. We need to get James on YouTube more often.
Absolutely. And potentially not all of the audience. No, James hosts Novara FM every Friday, 1 p.m. on Resonance FM, and then it goes straight out into our podcast feed. That's all for us.
That's all for us. Go to support.novaramedia.com. Get James a show.
Absolutely. So yeah,
another show.
Before we go, we are still doing our
who is this guy? It's like he started it.
We need to get co-founder James Butler a YouTube show. So please go to support.novaramedia.com, and we're asking you to subscribe with the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, so we can work around the clock. Of course, please share this show. Please tell all your friends, tell all your family.
Hit the subscribe button.
About Novara Media, and hit the subscribe button. This was Disky Sour. I'm Michael Walker. We are Novara Media. Goodbye.